Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Hello there, and welcome back to the Talent Equation. Again, having more and more conversations with people who are working out there in the talent space, and I'm really delighted to welcome Jonathan Henderson to the podcast. Jonathan, welcome. No problem at all. The starting point for this, or the genesis of this, is, I think, as always, having some dialogue on Twitter and having some conversations about approaches to coaching, approaches to player development. Before we dive into that, though, I wonder if you could sort of give everybody your backstory.
Yeah, I'm currently the academy manager at Bristol Rovers Football Club, a role I've had for the last 3 years. Going into my 7th season now with the club, so within a variety of different capacities. Began as an advanced development centre manager, became foundation phase coach, youth development coach, head of coaching. So I've been across the whole sort of spectrum of what the academy programme offers at the club. Prior to that, I spent some time in sports development. So my background was a local authority sports development officer, looking at sort of children's development and coach education, amongst other things. And I did that alongside doing my master's degree in sports science, which lent itself a lot to sort of child development in the free play setting as well, was kind of where I specialised in that.
Great. So we share a common background in that we both started in local authority sports development. I think it's been a great sort of breeding ground for quite a lot of sports development professionals.
Yeah, I think so. I think it gives you a whole plethora of experiences that sort of lend itself to, whether it be grassroots or professional development. It's all key learning experiences, I feel.
I think one of the things I found about doing that was you get such a broad variety of experiences from working. One day you're at an athletics track. The next day you're working in what you might call a socio-economically deprived area with kids who just you're trying to keep them from engaging in antisocial behaviour, and then the next you're working in an old people's home. It just gives you a great kind of grounding in being adaptable and being able to work with different people.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit, or we've been sort of exchanging information about, is particularly within your academy. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard your academy referenced to me around the work that you're doing over there. So I wonder if you could just expand a bit on kind of where your philosophy comes from and the approaches that you adopt.
Yeah, I think the key thing for us that, whilst we're attached to a professional football club and we are a professional football academy, we're keen not to lose sight on the fact that we're working with children first and foremost, and that's kind of the key message that we try and adopt with what we're doing. So we're very big on our training methodology being very play-based and very child-centred. It's not about the early professionalisation of children, so it's something that we're quite big on the way we do. We adopted a mantra that we've used internally, and you might have seen some of the stuff that we've done in the past, called the Performance Playground, and it's basically just trying to replicate that play-based and that game-based environment that we want children to experience first and foremost.
So what does that look like on a day-to-day basis then?
I think a lot of it is mainly looking at children having the ownership on what they do within the sessions. So that's not to say that they turn up and they can pick in terms of what they're doing. So it's still led by the coaches. But in terms of the direction that some of the sessions will go in, and in terms of some of the practices, they're all very play-based, trying to replicate the things that kids would do if adults weren't there to interfere and spoil their fun. So, in terms of the type of games that we'll always use and the type of sessions we'll always use will always involve some sort of opposition and chaos and interference. And the word chaos is probably something that maybe scares some coaches in the fact they haven't got complete control over what the session looks like, but we're okay with it, and it's kind of something that you're trying to educate the coaches within our programme that it is going to look a bit messy and it is going to look a bit chaotic. You're not going to always have the perfect session structure to what you want on paper, and it but that's actually good. Children are still learning some really relevant points within it, and they're still sort of progressing in an environment they enjoy being involved in.
And so I imagine that you're always trying to, something that I've been championing, I suppose, quite a bit, and one of the things I'm quite keen on is I firmly believe that there is a sweet spot here, and the sweet spot is you're getting young people who are enormously engaged in the experience, and almost at that point of genuine absorption in the activity. And at the same time, if the practice design is skillful, then they are learning an awful lot about the game that we want them to learn about, or the game we're encouraging them to learn about. So I'm assuming that's the kind of basis point for why you've adopted this approach.
Yeah, and like I say, I've seen it far too many times beforehand where people assume that the kids are going to come just because it's a professional environment, but the biggest reason that kids drop out of anything, regardless of whether it be academies or professional football or whether it be grassroots football, is that they simply don't enjoy the environment that they're in. So, kind of the two questions that I'll always ask from the coaches is, did the kids enjoy themselves and did they work hard? And hard work is normally a pre-indicator that they've enjoyed themselves, because I've never met anybody in their life who works hard when they don't enjoy what they're doing. So it's certainly a big focus on it.
So I'd be interested to know a little bit about the kind of, if you like, the sort of theoretical and philosophical underpinnings that led you to adopting this approach, and as a second part to this question, what the challenges have been.
The first part of that, I think it probably goes back to my MSc when kind of my focus was on physical activity levels in primary school children, and we were looking at the free play setting, the playground environment, and what did kids do when they're left to their own devices. And the study basically looked at we looked at about 20 primary schools across the region, so it's quite a comprehensive study in terms of the numbers that we looked at. And it was no surprise that kids who were actually left to play by themselves were actually more physically engaged, more active, and took part in more practice than what they did when it was in a structured, rigid session led by teachers. So the kind of recommendations from that was, look, how do you create that environment where kids will actually go and play themselves, but still maybe give them some guidance and some support on things that they can go and do. Fast forward several years later, then obviously I get the academy manager's job, and it's something that we've been doing a lot beforehand, was just looking at that play-based environment, and we kind of looked at the whole methodology of what we did, and we kind of felt it was more appropriate for the direction that we wanted to go in, where we did that, where it was children being children and having the opportunity to play, because that lends itself to more engagement, more buy-in, and more deeper learning. Second part of the question in terms of that, so how does remind me, what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
So the second part of the question was what the challenges you faced.
Challenges. I think because it was something more non-traditional, I think like anything, it takes a little bit of persuasion, a little bit of buy-in, and a little bit of education about why we're doing things, and that was both internally and externally. So, some coaches who may be more traditional, where it be coach-led, and we're the fountain of all knowledge, and we give you every little bit of knowledge that we can in a coaching session, and we expect the kids to learn from it. We're seeing, I think a bit of a cultural shift in terms of being more guided discovery and problem solving based, and kids having the ownership in what they do to learn and develop, but also translating that message from the staff also to parents and the wider community, because it's maybe not traditionally what they have seen, and they might turn up and look at training and think, to the untrained eye, if it is chaotic and there is a lot of stuff going on, and they might think, oh, the coach doesn't know what he's doing, or he hasn't got a handle on it, but it's just kind of us backing ourselves that actually it's really well structured, but it just doesn't look it from the outside, and it's a deliberate design by how we've done things, that isn't going to be easy to see as having kids stood in straight lines and stood on cones and something really manufactured.
So I'm interested to know how I'm just thinking of a kind of some exchanges I've had with fairly prominent people within either the sports world or the academic community, challenging this notion of play being an appropriate form of player or athlete development. And so I'm kind of interested to know, just sort of, almost like practically now, what your experiences have been in terms of how players engage, and not only how they engage, but how they develop using this approach.
I think the kids will engage, whether it's this approach or another approach, and it's not saying that this is just something that we believe in and we feel it fits for us. And I think just seeing it firsthand, the kids are engaged and they buy into it simply because when you give them the opportunity to ask questions or to problem solve, they come up with some really clever things. Sometimes we don't give the kids enough credit for their learning. When you look at, the thing that seems to raise its head every once in a while is a debate about sort of constant or random practices. And I'm not sitting here saying that constant and closed unopposed practices are bad. There's certainly a place in the industry in terms of what we do, but because of the short time span we have with the kids, we want to maximise that real game-based learning, the things that they're not necessarily going to get to do when they're away from us, because the playground environment or the street football environment doesn't necessarily exist like it used to years ago when we were growing up. So we try to replicate as much of that as we can to give them the opportunity to practice in those environments when they can.
You just made me think of something really interesting that I've never really considered before, and I'm wondering if I'd just be interested to get your view on this. So historically, or back in the day, we'd obviously have kids playing kind of pretty rough and ready street football, and they'd obviously develop fairly good understanding of game forms by the fact that they've probably got to try and navigate their way through about 20 other kids because we're playing 20 versus 20 on the street or something along those lines, or in the playground. But because that doesn't really happen as readily as it used to, are we now essentially saying that we're now trying to create that environment as much as possible within our player development environments because we can't trust that that's going to take place anymore?
I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. The irony is not lost to me that we're trying to structure unstructured play environments. But it's something that one of our coaches, Luke Smith, who's our lead foundation phase coach in the programme, has done some really good stuff on street football, and we've actually had the kids in the car park playing unstructured environments, whether it be games or whether it be headers and volleys or all the sorts of games that the kids would normally do but maybe don't do as much now as they used to. And it's a safe environment where it is closed off from traffic and things like that, but ultimately they can just go and play, and you are still going to have the constraints of if you fall down the concrete it is going to hurt. You've got massive numbers and the kids got to solve it themselves, and the times that we've done that, we're there purely as facilitators. From a health and safety perspective, we're not there coaching it, we're not there intervening it. It's a lot of peer-led stuff. Within the older age groups we do a lot of mixed age groups, so part of the problem with sort of organised sport is how do you get the chance to be the bigger or the smaller or the older or the younger kid if everything's done in one format with the same kids, same age band right the way through the system. So it's trying to just create as many variables as we can that maybe they would have had anyway if they were left to their own devices and played the way they used to.
And I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? So, because whereas traditionally we would have said, right, they're doing all this sort of play, what we'll do is we'll try and refine them technically when we see them, because obviously they may not be picking up certain technical components. Whereas sort of the opposite's happening now, where they spend time on their own, because they're not necessarily connecting with other kids. So they do quite a lot of what you might call block practice, maybe in the garden against the wall or wherever it might be. So when we get them into our environments, we want to expose them to more game forms so that they get the decision-making elements. It's kind of an interesting flip, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think certainly from our perspective, we're fortunate that when the kids come into it, they've already got a really good technical base anyway. So, how it would look at grassroots level or for absolute beginners, it might be very different. But certainly for us, the players we've got have got a good level to begin with, and then a lot of the things that we do, like I said, that isolated and individual practice is kind of what we deem as our homework tasks. So we've got a whole sort of football at home program which involves ball mastery, it involves controlling, it involves some sort of physical development, but it's all little things that they would do one-to-one or with them and their friend, or like I said, a ball against a wall, or all various different things that they can maybe do slightly differently to the way it used to be done.
Interesting. We're almost like flipping the classroom in a kind of football context, aren't we, or in a sport context?
Yeah, I think so.
So the other thing I was just going to ask you about, I just want to kind of pick your brains on this a little bit, because something I've been wrestling with. I think for a long time we've been, the whole sort of fundamental movement skills concept and all these different ideas. And the thinking, I think, there is, you build a foundation of movement patterns, and off the back of those movement patterns that you can then develop, more complex movement patterns that may involve sport-specific movements and go like that. I'm not sure I'm that convinced by that sort of that argument, and one of the reasons for that is I'm obviously, as you know, sort of a pretty big advocate of the idea that movement should be a response to some sort of challenge that the environment's throwing at us. And in our context, it would be an opponent who's trying to take away either the ball or stop us from receiving the ball from somebody else. So obviously movement needs to be defined in those terms, and so therefore I think exposure to lots of opportunities to avoid others and those sorts of things is a really important thing. And in doing that, we are inviting these young people to make a lot of decisions. So the idea of doing movement patterns in isolation doesn't seem to make sense to me. I find it difficult to conceptualize. So as a result, I think that whereas in the past we've been looking for good technicians or players with good technique, I think what we're now looking for perhaps is what I call technicians. And what I mean by that is players who are able to kind of select from various appropriate movement patterns based on what it is they're seeing around them in terms of opponent and teammates. Wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'd certainly lean more towards it being contextualised. So, things that are done in isolation, and if you look at the transfer into the game, obviously it's based on what the environment looks like at that time. So whether it's the opposition, whether it's decision making, the teammates, the space around you, and this, those decisions and those environments will come out in 1,000 different ways in a simple practice. I think I would lean more towards, like you said, in terms of that being certainly our philosophy is based more on the chaotic and the decision-making, problem-solving within a opposed environment. But again, flipping it the other way and playing devil's advocate a little bit, it needs to be at the appropriate level of decision-making, the appropriate level of chaos. So if you're putting a kid who's got no experience of the environment and has no opportunity to choose from various solutions that he's built up beforehand, then I think you're setting the kid up to fail. So it might be a case of that, they need to have some understanding, or it needs to be a very limited amount of opposition, so that way they can build that knowledge and build that experience to then further down the line in a more complex environment have all those different decisions and experiences to choose from and select. And like I said, kids will progress within it and they'll pick it up, and you can go into a playground and throw a ball in, and kids who've never played whatever sport it is will soon start picking it up. But does that mean they're going to be particularly competent in it? Then if the levels far outweigh what their capabilities are, then they're probably going to struggle and they're probably not going to play catch up to the rest of the group. So I think it depends on the context of the individual. I think it depends on the level of experience they've got. But certainly in our environment and my personal philosophy, I'd fit it more towards the game-based and problem-solving environment. That's what I'd like to see more of.
And I think I don't disagree. I think there's an interesting area here that I'd be interested to sort of debate with you a little bit, which is the player. I think it goes back to something that Danny Newcombe spoke about on one of the previous episodes, where he was talking about what he calls his environment design framework, basically, and I call it the funnel of variability. So I think the skill here is, and I think what a lot of people's assumption is that when I talk about kind of a game-based approach or a play-based approach, that the assumption is that kids are just playing loads of games and or even small-sided games. And don't get me wrong, that's a part of the feature here. But I think there's a lot in between that's more engaging. So there are, for example, lots of games that I would play within my coaching, or children play in my coaching, that enable them to explore different, what you might call technical solutions. And by sort of taking away lots of variability, so for example, like say, you're reducing some of the chaos because maybe there's only one opponent to play against, or maybe the space or the task is changed in such a way that encourages them to explore different solutions. then that enables us to kind of get the best of both worlds. Not only are we helping them to develop techniques that are going to help them, but also we're starting to see them do that in the context of what an opponent might do.
Yeah, I agree with that fundamentally as well. So it's, like I said, it is just making it appropriate to the level and still incorporating some sort of decision and some sort of chaos, but again, pitching it at the level that the player or the child is able to, not find it too easy, because you obviously want it to be a challenge, but at the same time, it's got to be a challenge that's achievable. Kind of the whole expression about trial and error, and I kind of look at it thinking, if the kid's making error after error after error and never really solving the problem, then have we pitched it at the right level in the first place? At some point, they need to be able to get success from that approach. So what that looks like depends on the need of the individual.
Where would you stand though on the whole idea of that there's a value in the struggle? Because I've always sort of advocated that, weirdly enough, when I'm working in a talent context, I work in lots of different contexts, but in a talent context, for example, when I'm working with my under 10s on a Sunday morning, generally speaking, I kind of do want to see as much success as possible with an element of stretch and struggle within that. But you kind of want to see some smiling faces, don't you? But in a talent context, when they're electing to be there and they're buying into the concept of learning and improvement, I kind of evaluate my session slightly differently. I want the kids to be slightly disgruntled. Because they've had to struggle to try and build something. I don't know where you come out on that one.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that as well. So the mindset is kind of the big thing that everybody knows in terms of Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, and do the players appreciate the challenge and see it as something they want to strive towards, or do they take the easy option and just want success? And from our observations, the players that make it through the system are always ones that have got that attitude and effort as well as the ability. So that's something we talk a lot about. And they want the struggle, they want to try and strive, they want to try and push themselves a little bit, because the ones that sit in their comfort zone probably aren't going to progress longer term, or those that find things difficult when they don't go their way and haven't got the coping strategies psychologically to deal with it are probably the ones that lack the resilience to make it through to the professional level anyway. So yeah, it has got to have an element of, I can't remember who it was that said it, but I saw a quote recently, and it was talking about how talent needs trauma, and so yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
It's an interesting one with the talent needs trauma whole concept, because there's quite a lot of discussion around whether talent does need trauma, or it just so happens that quite a lot of elite high performers have had some form of traumatic experience. I think it's been interesting because there's quite a lot of discussion about this happening at the moment, because there was I think you might be referring to there's the Great British Medalist Project, which was a study done where they looked at serial medalists and identified this traumatic experience that they've had, and then I think some people have sort of extrapolated the findings of that to assume then that we need to sort of manufacture traumatic experiences for players in order to develop. I'm not quite sure that was ever the message intended, but I do agree, though. I do think that getting young people to understand that difficulty, challenge and failure and the overcoming of failure is an inherent part of the getting better process, and they need to get used to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Just as something else I wanted to just talk to you about as well, just going back to the point around failure and success. I think when I'm looking at these sorts of ideas around talent and talent development and creating the right environment, going back to this idea of you were talking about appropriate levels of chaos. The one thing I wonder if our children get enough goes. Do you know what I mean? Do you think they get enough goes of that kind of deliberately designed chaotic environment that's going to challenge them in a certain way, so that they have that opportunity for exploration of different ways to solve that problem? I kind of wonder if we intervene too quickly. I don't know what you think.
I think that comes back to the old coach education style, where it's stop, stand still, I want to tell you everything I know, isn't it? So it's, I think a lot of the times it's how you intervene, and something that we're quite big on is obviously that the practice wants to run as much as it can, and if it needs intervention, that's great, step in and coach as you need to. It's about how do we guide and support those players, whether it's with a little one-to-one chat whilst the session's going on, whilst the practice lends itself to lots of different decisions, and kind of something that we're big on, certainly with the older players and things as well, is we don't want to give a decision for them. So if they make what we maybe perceive as being the wrong decision, we won't tell them what the other option is. It might just be making them aware of, have you seen the other option? And if the answer is yes, then obviously that's your choice. You've chosen to choose a decision that you have. If you haven't been aware of the other option, then it's about us, giving you the understanding of what else other options might be. So that way, next time you're in that sort of situation to make the decision, you've got more options to choose from. But ultimately, it's still the player's decision. We're not the ones coaching, telling you, pass, run, shoot, dribble, take him on, whatever it might be. It's, if a player does decide to go 1v1 and loses the ball, you might say, look, did you see the other player inside? Yeah, I saw him. Great, that's fine for us because you've just made the choice and you can make your own decisions based on the information you have at your disposal.
Yeah, and that's one of the big challenges, isn't it? Is that too many, particularly youngsters, and I mean, it depends on the age, obviously, but a lot of youngsters they're not really aware enough. They're not taking in the information in order to be able to make the decision. They're just kind of doing things and hoping for the best more often than not. Yeah,
and that's when it comes back to, like we said before, that appropriate level of chaos or decision making. So, if you put a 7-year-old into an environment where he's playing 9v9 and he's got half a dozen different decisions every time he's on the ball, he's probably going to struggle to pick the right one. But if he's in a 2v2 environment and his decision is simply, do I dribble at the player and beat him, or do I pass to my teammate, then that's a really more appropriate one for that player at that moment in time of his development to make a decision on.
I wrestle with this quite a bit, because quite often whenever you sort of maybe put a constraint in place, in order to kind of limit some of the decisions and help the player by narrowing down the available options, and so they can begin to sort of explore between, say, one or two or three. There's quite a lot of people in the what you might call that kind of ecological community, shall you say, who don't like that because they feel that you should have as many available options available at all times. But my problem is with that is, like you say, there's too many information sources coming in and the player can't deal with them all, and so as a result they actually end up sort of not making any decisions at all. They just kind of play the game and get on with it. So I do feel sometimes, it's a skillful approach, depending on what your outcome is, that you have to sometimes narrow the options down so that the children can begin to explore between one or two.
Yeah, and I think it's like anything. It's what's your rationale for why you're doing it. If you've thought out what the consequence or the return is, and it's got an action that's desirable, then why wouldn't you do it? But again, if we've just done it because we feel that we want to do it and there's no real rhyme or reason why we put a certain constraint on something, and it doesn't really make sense to the game, or it doesn't look like the actual game does in reality, then that's when we've got to reconsider whether the challenges and constraints that we're putting on kids are the appropriate ones or not.
Absolutely. So anyway, just sort of talking a little bit about more specifically, you sent me something across on Twitter, which was a particular game form that you've been experimented with, and you've seen some different kind of results in terms of player actions and things like that. I wonder if you could just kind of talk people through what you've been experimenting with.
Yeah, so as we said before, we're trying to make the experience as appropriate to the kids as we can in terms of their stage of development. And one of the aspects that we've done with our under 9s and under 10s players on a match day is that we've manipulated the game that we don't use throw-ins. So instead of the traditional throw-in restarts when the ball goes out of play, we use either dribbling or passing rule. So the idea was that it became more free-flowing. It felt more like play as opposed to these are the rules that you've got to stick within, and you've got to stay within these boundaries. And sometimes the more sort of loose boundaries just allows the game to play a little bit more, and that's kind of what the kids want to do. And we did a little bit of a study on it, and we kind of looked at, I think it was about half a dozen games or so that we looked at, and we sort of analysed the data from it. So it wasn't just sort of our idea and our feelings for it. We kind of looked at, right, what was the statistical evidence from what we did to find out what the return was. And it was quite staggering that in terms of the old rules, if you like, and the manipulated rules, in comparison to gameplay time, the ball was in play probably about 11% more just by having these dribbling, passing rules. The restarts were a lot quicker. The players had more opportunity to retain possession from the restarts. They had more opportunities to dribble and beat players in 1v1 situations. And all the things that we felt were appropriate for that age group kind of came out in abundance. We've had a little bit of resistance to it from within the community that we play in, because it's not a typical game. It's not proper football, however you want to term it. I'm not really too bothered about what the purists think about it being the actual match when the kids are 8 and 9 years old. I'm trying to find something that's more appropriate to them, and if they get an opportunity to dribble more 1v1, or they get a chance to get quicker restarts, or it's not as restrictive, then we're all up for it.
And you've been doing this in a kind of competitive format where you're playing matches against other clubs.
Yeah,
is that
so
right?
I mean that's the thing is we do all these sort of things in training anyway, where it's a really sort of safe environment where you can kind of do what you want. But we thought, well, let's extend it to the actual match day where we can't actually control what the opposition do, or it is a traditional non-competitive competitive environment, if you like. There's no league tables and results for the kids at these ages, but it is a typical match day environment against another opposition from another club. And kind of the benefit of the academy system is for the home games you can kind of dictate the format to a certain extent yourself. So we proposed this to a few of the foundation phase coaches and a few of the academy managers. Most were on board. One or two were like, well, we don't want to do it, but we haven't really got a choice because you're the host and you want to do it, so we went with it anyway. And the big thing is, when we spoke to the players of both teams, and our boys have been doing it for a while now, so and they seem to really engage it. But when you've done it with the opposition, and you've spoken to their players afterwards, they seem to really enjoy it as well. So kind of the benefit of us only doing it at home is that the players still get the other experience when they go away from home, so they're getting both formats of the game, so it's not just one format or the other. But we felt it's really worked for us, and kind of we were keen to share it. And it's not a new idea, it's not something that we can take any credit for, because we basically nicked it from a whole host of other places. And we saw them out when we went to Ajax last season. Ajax were doing it at the younger age groups, and obviously looking at things like hockey where they've got the self-pass rule and things like that as well. We kind of just took a whole load of ideas and said, right, if we ripped up the rule book, what would we want to look like for the kids at this age group? And we tried it, we toyed with it, and it's something we've had in our programme now for over a year, and it works really well for us.
It's kind of an interesting thing, and I think it needs to happen a bit more in kids sport, doesn't it? Because I think the fact that everybody plays the same format is quite a limiting factor. I always think that you should each organizer of, like you say, the home match or the festival or whatever it is, should have the freedom to be able to bring in their own kind of rules. Now I know inevitably there'll be some people out there who will try and manipulate the rules for their advantage, because and all that sort of stuff. But actually that's part of the challenge, isn't it? Because you want to ask the players fairly, and I imagine you take an approach on a match day where you've got relatively limited intervention from the coaches because you're hoping that the kids are going to solve the problem. Actually, just to see how they do solve the problem, because ultimately the results are, like you say, you're not bothered about the results. You're bothered about what learning experience that you can glean.
Yeah, certainly. And again, I think that's something that certainly within the academy system are getting better at in terms of the variety of games programmes. So. The Premier League have been quite big on a variety of different festivals that the Football League have also incorporated. And if I think back to what we've done over the last season, we've done futsal events, we've done street football events, we've done five-a-side events, we've done various different team numbers, whether it be 3v3s through to 7v7s for the real young ones. We've done some mixed team events where we've had 4 clubs come together, then we've picked the teams at random from all the players, so it's not Bristol Rovers against Bristol City, against Exeter, against Plymouth. It's just a whole group of kids who've been put into different teams for the day. So it was a whole a lot of returns from the social corner type of things that we were looking at as a focus for that one. The Premier League have done whole things on what they call power play, so we played an indoor tournament where when music played it was worth 2 goals, so you really saw the anxiety level of the kids go up because they wanted to score or not concede when it was in his power play moments, which was really interesting. I think the boys did one quite recently where they started with a penalty shootout, 3 penalties for each team, and whatever the score from the penalty shootout was went into the game. So again, you're getting that opportunity to practice penalty shootout in a slightly pressurised situation, even though there's no real consequence as such, but gives them a chance to practice penalties, which they probably wouldn't get the opportunity to do a lot of anyway. But then it's also, right, how do I manage the game going into it? If I'm 3-0 down or I'm 3-0 up, what does that scenario look like from a match day venue as well? So, but yeah, it's just trying to give the kids as many different experiences instead of it just being 1,000 of the same experience. Can we give them as many different experiences as we can?
I'd like to see some other sports adopting that. Certainly in my own involvement with hockey, everybody basically plays the same format, and I'm a bit like, why does everyone just do the same thing? Firstly, I think it's particularly with the younger ones, some of the under 8s, they're playing across a pitch, and it's just huge, and it's just such a kind of a shame because they're not getting a great experience. Whereas I reckon if we cut the pitch in half and played with probably half the numbers, they'd have a better time. I think it'd actually be a better experience for everybody involved as well. I think I love the power play idea, by the way. That's a great one. I'm stealing that. That's going to be brilliant.
Yeah.
We did something similar in rugby actually with a 10-a-side game which we targeted at university students, and actually that worked really well. So along similar lines where you got double points during your power play. And yeah, it's interesting, like you say, how it creates a different level of kind of focus and anxiety, and how invariably people just fail to achieve a goal because they're almost like kind of too intense.
Yeah. I guess it was something that they did, and it was quite interesting to see it. Certainly with the younger ones, we did it with I think it was under 9s, 10s, and 11s, and you got the ones who really, really sort of responded to it, and you got the other ones who just crumbled under the pressure, so to speak, and it was quite interesting to see the different return that the players got from it.
Brilliant stuff. So, I mean, this variety of competitive opportunities, I think, is a really powerful message. I'm actually interested just to sort of drill in a little bit more to your approach to this in terms of when you're at a competitive event. How do you and your coaches operate? What's the mode you take?
In terms of the competitive environment, so within the academy system, not a lot of the games are deemed as competitive games in the traditional sense, so there's no consequence for winning or losing, so it gives us a real opportunity to focus on player development. So instead of it being about the result being the only thing that matters, we can actually stretch the players in different ways, and we can give a little bit more ownership to them, and the coaches can be not completely standoffish and completely silent, because they're still there to support and help the players and offer some guidance as we go along. And I think that's kind of a big message from me, that we kind of get lost in this let them play, where the coaches then don't actually say anything or do anything. So it's trying to get that balance where actually the coaches are still there to support and to challenge the players, but in an appropriate way that isn't taking away their autonomy from the kids making the decisions themselves. When it comes to the competitive environment, so where there is a consequence of winning and losing, it's something that we're trying to embed in the programme a little bit more, because the academy system doesn't lend itself from under 9s to under 16s to have any competition. So there's no leagues, there's no cups, there's no formalised tournament experiences apart from the ones that we try and put our players into. So if we take them abroad for a pre-season tour, or if we manufacture our own events until the boys get to under 18. So we were kind of noticing that if the first experience is under 18s and the boys are going to play in non-league grounds and stadiums and under floodlights and in this real competitive environment where points and winning become a little bit more the emphasis in preparation for getting into the first team, how do we provide some sort of those experiences for the kids in the younger age groups? So we created last year with a few of the other academies a Floodlit Cup for under 15s and under 16s, which was exactly that. It was a proper cup competition. It was winners and losers. There was you win your game, you go to the next round, or you qualify from your group, you get to progress. If you don't, then you're out, you get no more games throughout the course of the season. And that kind of really complemented the developmental games programme, where the result, in inverted commas, didn't matter. We've given the kids this environment where actually the focus is on how do you find a way to win the game. Still play the way you want and still not sacrificing the philosophy, but how do you manage the game, or how do you try and play to win the game for purely for the result's sake. And it was something that was quite interesting because, again, some of the players had never really experienced that. Certainly boys that had been within the academy from the age of 8 who hadn't come from grassroots clubs later on had never had that experience of playing in a proper competitive environment. And it was really interesting to see the mentality and approach that some players took over others.
I'm interested in sort of getting into this in a bit more detail, because I think it's you said something earlier which is quite kind of interesting to me around the idea of what you might call something without an outcome, or a sort of there's no consequence for winning or losing, and how that's sort of equated with being more developmental from a player development perspective. What do you think is the rationale behind that, or the thinking is there?
I think it's probably, if you look traditionally at the environment, it became very adult-centred, didn't it? It was our it was our values being imposed on kids, and it was about our ego to try and win games. And I think kind of we've maybe gone too far the other way, where it's been like, right, if we take all that away, that problem goes away to a certain extent, although it doesn't really. If you still see it on, on the touchline at academy games and grassroots games, you still get the coach who wants to win the game for his own ego and his own statistical record, even though it doesn't exist. But I think kind of the academy systems and football have gone, right, let's take away competition, despite the fact the kids still want to win, the kids still know what the score was, even if we don't emphasise it. And we promote a winning mentality where the kids should want to win the game and strive to win the game through the values of hard work and effort, but also accepting that the result isn't the be all and end all. So, it's the process to get the result. I'd rather have us, play well and lose 3-2 than play badly but win 3-2, because ultimately in a development programme the result can't be the indicator for success, because it's not the result that's going to get players to the next stage of their development or into the first team or to play in the Premier League or whatever that might be.
So so the emphasis, so this is I guess the bit that I was just trying to unpick a little bit, is the use of this word competition, because I can hear a certain section of let's take the media or society screaming that this is why we don't do very well on the international stage, because we've dumbed it down and we don't have competition and we've got non-competitive kids who don't know how to win. I can hear it all resonating, and what you're saying there is it's not about being non-competitive. It's absolutely competitive. It's just where you're changing the emphasis or the focus away from the result as being the all-important thing, so that you can have a bit more freedom for the players to be able to explore different ways of playing without the constant fear of, for example, making a mistake and then therefore costing a team the game because they were trying to do the right thing but they didn't quite execute it correctly.
Yeah, of course, and I think if in terms of looking at that, I want to win every game. Don't get me wrong. That's the nature of anybody who works in sport. You want to win every game, but as I said, I wouldn't want to do that at the expense of kids' development. And if it might be a player needs to work on his 1v1 defending, and I'm going to put him at the back, and he's going to cost you a goal, but he's getting the opportunity to develop from it. If the result was the only thing that mattered, the coach probably wouldn't put him into that environment because he'd be too precious about, he might cost me the game or he might cost me a goal, when actually it doesn't matter. And that's not, like I say, it's not sanitising the whole thing where we don't believe in competition, because we really do. But for us, the competitive environment comes from the values. It comes from the way you conduct yourself. It comes from your behaviour. It's not necessarily just the result. Something that a lot of the time is completely uncontrollable. So, there'll be games that you'll come up against teams that are just simply better than you. And if your only performance indicator is the result, then you can never get any success from those games. Whereas actually, if the individuals have got challenges, or if the focus is on playing a certain way or trying to execute something that we've worked on in training, or an individual meeting his individual development needs, then you get success in that respect. So surely that's more important long term than whether an under 11 won 3-2 on the weekend when nobody really cares, no one really remembers in a year's time anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there are rules of the game which involve your objective is in this case to score a goal, and that's the way you measure how the game is played, and you've got those objectives. At the end of the day, somebody is, as an individual, you are participating in that activity against an opponent. And going back to the whole Greek definition of competition, it's about striving to make each other better. Then that's actually an enormously rewarding and important experience. My problem often is that things become, what people don't realise is the more they focus on the outcome and the result, the less competitive they become, which is kind of a weird thing to consider.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And sitting here looking, excuse me. So like I was saying, it's about the appropriate level for what the children need, and that competition isn't just based on the result. It has to be based on, like I said, two people striving against each other, or teams striving against each other, or individuals on opposition sides striving against each other. And I might win my individual battle 1v1, and I might have a really good game against my direct opposite player. But if 3 or 4 other people don't, and I lose the game, then does that mean that I've lost, or have I actually won my individual challenge, my individual battle on the field? And I think that's something else that kind of the focus get lost on, that it's this collective, when ultimately certainly in our environment, we're not here to produce teams. We're here to produce individual players who can progress through a system. So if the team result is the only thing that defines success, then it's not always going to be achievable for players to be successful.
But I like what you've also done is you've recognised that actually we can't just give a diet of competition that isn't outcome focused. Actually, they're part of the mixed diet of competitive experience for young people within your environment is to provide them one where actually all of a sudden now it does matter, and actually there's a bit of a different kind of pressure situation there, and they've got to be able to still try and perform against, or and still do all the other things that you've worked on in all the other different contexts in this slightly more pressure-fueled experience. And then again, there's more learning to be derived from that, because if we can perform in that pressure environment, then we've learned a lot. If we can't perform in that pressure environment, we know there's other things that we need to work on.
Yeah, correct. And that was the idea behind the Floodlit Cup competitions. And we've extended it to the under-14s this season as well. We probably wouldn't go much younger than that in terms of that type of competitive environment. But it is about giving them this. It's a little taster of it. So it's not saying that every week, every game really matters, and that's all that this key focus is on. But how do players get that experience unless you expose them to that experience in the first place? And the system doesn't lend itself to that unless we manufacture it. So we've had to create these cup competitions. We've had to provide that experience of what it looks like, because when the boys step up into the under-18s or potentially into the first team at whatever age that might be, the reality is a player at 16, 17, 18 can go and play competitive football, and if he's never had that experience, then he's probably going to freeze under the pressure of it because we haven't prepared him properly or given him part of his developmental experience to incorporate that.
Just going to sort of coming back to the point you made right at the start, where you were talking about the play environment and the environment. I like what you said around trying to replicate what children would do if adults weren't around to spoil their fun. My experiences of this, because I've adopted a very similar approach with the young people, including my son, so. I've had interesting conversations over the kitchen table with my wife about why isn't he better? shouldn't he be? You're a coach. Shouldn't he be better than he is? Now, interestingly, I've started to see some things emerging in my son's play that are really quite exciting, but that's by the by. But I've noticed that certainly my players, the ones I have in my my club, my environment, we're not as good as other players. Now it's slightly different because obviously I suppose your players are selected in with like you say, with a certain technical base, but I'm working in a grassroots context. When we play against the club, there are kids from other clubs with a more stronger technical base, and as a result, they're superior in terms of playing. But what I've noticed is, so my players aren't as good. When I say aren't as good, they don't appear to be as good because they haven't got the same levels of technique. If you come up against any challenges as far as that's concerned, because the play-based approach is slower, you don't see kids with tools because they've been taught them. They're having to learn them themselves, which takes a lot longer. Have you come up against any challenges like that?
Yeah, and again, something that we're quite big on is, certainly as coaches, we talk about principles opposed to like really choreographed patterns and things like that, certainly as you get through the age groups. And we want the players to understand what the game looks like as opposed to us choreographing what set movements and things like that would be. So but we've gone to other clubs beforehand and they've been very well, I won't say which clubs, but we go and they're very well drilled and they know the triggers and they know their movements and they've got the rotation down and they look $1 million because they pass around in these little pre-choreographed routines. But the trouble is, once the kids figure it out and stop them being able to do that, what you tend to find is that the players haven't got the decision-making and problem-solving ability to actually solve the problem that's been put in front of them. So, if their pre-rehearsed pattern isn't able to come out, then they're looking to the sidelines for help and they don't know how to solve the problem themselves. Whereas I'd like to back that our kids can actually try and go out there and you put them out and they believe in a principle of the way that we want to play, and they'll come up with solutions that will fit within that framework of how we want the kids to operate. But again, like you said, looking at maybe players who are at that moment in time, further ahead in their development, I think you just kind of got to be sort of realistic too. That that's going to be the game at some level. In every sport, in every industry, there's always going to be somebody who at that moment in time is better than what you are, and that's unavoidable. But it's really making sure you contextualise, why are we doing this the way we do it? What's the belief structure? What's the returns that we expect to see? What are the other benefits? So it might not just necessarily be, I want to produce better technical or tactical footballers. It might actually look, I want to instill a love of the game, that kids, regardless of when they leave the programme, still want to play football or still want to engage in physical activity from a sort of social well-being perspective and things like that as well. So it's a plethora of things that you look at of what the importance is, and sometimes if a coach has got a team who are just better, then just reassess what the actual goal is and what that measure of success on that day looks like.
So what would you do in that scenario? Because I've had a very live experience recently where I had a parent come into me who was sort of managing one of the teams and played a game against another club that's got a huge player base, and a lot of the kids are from certain schools that have done lots and lots of time on task, and they're just they're just far more advanced in terms of most aspects of their play, and we lose to 13-14-0, and this parent comes to me, they were so disheartened and they felt really so. If I was running that team, which I wasn't, but if I was, I would have gone into that match knowing entirely that was the likely outcome. So I would have focused on different things and said, we're going to measure our success not by the result, but by certain other things that we're working on to develop. What would you do? What would be your approach to that if you knew you were coming up against a side that you're expected to lose against?
Yeah, that would be the same sort of thing. So you reinforce what your targets for the game are, and if, as I said before, if your target is to go and win the game, and you're not going to win the game, then you can't get any success from it. But if it's, something that we would do with the players, they've all got their own individual development plans. So the target for the day would be like, how many times can you achieve one of your goals, or can you get some success in a specific challenge that focuses on you? So that way, again, the result doesn't dictate whether a player is successful in inverted commas or not. It's one player might be very successful in terms of his individual challenge, but the other 10 players haven't been. But that way, he's still getting some success in his mind, and it's about keeping those meshes consistent. Like, this is what we're focused on today. This is what our measure of success is. This is how we're going to try and achieve that. It's not, can we win the game, because that's probably an unrealistic expectation. Other ways of doing it as well would quite something. We've got quite a lot of flexibility within the academy programme, that if you knew that was the case and you've got good line of communication with other clubs, that maybe you manipulate what players are involved. So whether it might be mixed age groups, or we've had times when we've gone and played your Man Cities and your Arsenals and your Chelseas, and if we were to take, for example, our under 11s and go like for like, that you'd probably struggle. So what we do is we'll speak to them beforehand, and we'll be allowed to play a couple of older age players in, because that way it's a good challenge for everybody and it levels the playing field a bit, and they get some returns from it, because certainly in our environment, even the team that goes to win 12-0 are probably looking at thinking, right, I would have rather had a better return for myself out of it, for our players. So how do we ensure that we get the best experience for our players? And that might not always be just winning 12-0, because it might be great for the strikers, but the defender who never gets to touch the ball, the goalkeeper who never has a shot to save, might actually be more beneficial to manipulate that practice in that game before they get there.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I do question what the experience for the more advanced team is. I don't think they've got a great deal of learning out of that, apart from perhaps learning that what they already knew, which is they're superior.
Yeah, and this becomes obviously the issue of, if that's in a competitive environment where it's a league, league tables and 3 points on a Saturday, well, the chances are that will be the most important factor for those players or for that coach. And whilst there is that element of organised competition, then it probably does limit the sort of boundaries of what manipulation you can do. But that's with us, where it doesn't actually matter who wins or loses. There's no league table. There's no 3 points on offer. Then people are probably more open to trying different things, because there isn't the consequence of, I didn't get my 3 points on Saturday, and now I'm second in the league and I'm not going to win a title.
Yeah. In this particular scenario, we most often play in festivals, which, like you say, the outcome of the festival isn't a focus. It's everybody gets the same number of games. They do record the scores, but generally speaking, everybody goes home with a medal, which for under 10, under 12 is, in community sport, is a really healthy environment. But what they've now added in at under 10 and under 12 is they've added in these league games, which are a different format. It's kind of our best versus their best in theory. Which I'm never that about. And our best is whoever's available, whereas their best is, they have to select because they've got a huge player base. It's just that's the different thing is you have to evaluate it from that perspective. It's the equivalent of a non-league team going up against one of the Premiership giants. Your expectation of success is different, but you're going to measure your performance in a different way.
Yeah, and I say we've done lots of things like that in terms of if we play local league sides, we'll play them at a different age group. So we'll play our 15s against a 16s or an 18 side, or we'll play with less players than what they will. If the game becomes really comfortable one way, then we would play underloaded, and they'd have more numbers than them. So that way again we get an appropriate return for us. And we've even done things with our younger ones when the games look like they're going to be completely one side. We just mix the teams up because ultimately it doesn't matter. We're quite happy to say, right, okay, you 4 boys are going to go play for them, and those 4 boys will come and play for us, and it really levels the playing field. Actually, everybody gets something out of it.
As somebody who played in goal in a game for my my village, and I think it was under 13 or under 14 against the Chester Academy and lost 24-0, I feel that very acutely.
Yeah, and again, who gets anything out of that other than a coach's ego that he's won 24-0? So if you're sort of looking at it after a couple of, if you're 5-0 down after 5 minutes, then maybe somebody needs to have a look at it and say, actually, is this the best experience that we're giving to the kids? And if the answer is no, then why are we? Oh, well, we can't change it because the rules say that we can't, and the rules say it's got to be 11v11, and it's got to be your team against my team, and it's, kind of the flexibility that we have allows us to look at that from a more rational perspective and say, right, actually, what do we need to do to make it more appropriate for the kids?
Thankfully, I think obviously that was about more than 20 odd years ago. So thankfully, I think times have moved on, and I'd like to think those sorts of experiences, certainly when it comes to playing an academy team, wouldn't really be replicated. But I'm not so sure in grassroots sport, whatever the sport is, not just football, that I don't know how often that does actually happen like that. I think sadly, it's a bit more of a common experience than perhaps we'd like it to be.
I wouldn't think that's unique to just grassroots football. I'd imagine it probably still happens at academy football as well.
Okay.
So yeah, it's, we're not sitting here saying that we're perfect and we've got all the answers, and there's still things that we can be better at. But ultimately, just look at it from a common sense approach, which unfortunately isn't that common. So it's you've got to try and find what is the most appropriate thing for the kids, what is the most appropriate thing for their learning, and can we provide the best experience for them as possible.
Having been a policymaker within a sport, or a number of different sports actually, I sort of feel, because you mentioned earlier about how, say, the Premier League and the FA have brought in this, within the academies, having the what you might call the non-outcome focused competition. And I understand why they do that, because what they're hoping to do is to bring about a change of behaviour in the people who are operating those particular competitive opportunities. But I do feel like you're quite often, when you do that, we did something similar in rugby, change the competitive format. But you're quite often you're in sort of bit of a hiding to nothing when you do that, because you do that because you know that if you don't, that you're not really going to be able to change things and not going to be able to provide a better experience. But at the same time, you know that it's a bit of a blunt instrument, and it doesn't really necessarily solve the problem, because it's still a people thing that's going on there.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the things that you might see would be to do with parents as well, and it's it's trying to educate and give people a bit of understanding about why we do things, or what the policy is, and why we've implemented it, as opposed to this is what the rules are, this is how it's going to be. Because we've still, even one of the biggest things that we get the resistance from, or maybe not so much nowadays, but typically it used to be parents from the sidelines coaching, or not understanding that there's a reason why our coach hasn't said anything, or why the coaches haven't said anything, and they just look and say, oh, he's not doing anything, he's not helping the kids, and they feel they have to. But by doing it, you've just given the kid all the answers, and you've just done his homework for him, and it doesn't lend itself to the player actually getting what he needs, and it is by design. But unless you're communicating that message to people, and that's something that we try and do, is here's an understanding of why we do things and what we do and the rationale behind it. So that way it's not us and them, it's everybody together, and trying to engage people. I think that's the most important thing.
I bet I'm conscious that we're sort of coming up on time, and you're super busy, so I want to be respectful of your time. But I would be missed if I didn't just ask you a bit more about the parent scenario, because I imagine as an academy manager, you've been in a crash course of parent management, parent engagement. I don't know how you term it, but I'd be interested just to get some of your kind of key lessons there, really.
It's communication and rationalising what you do, as I said before, is the key thing. So it's not just dictating, these are our rules and you will fit in or not. It's, look, these are the reasons why we do things, and we'll have induction evenings with all the players and parents at the start of each season. Any new player who comes in will have a mini induction when they come in. We'll have parents workshops, and we don't want to term it as parent education because it's not about us preaching to them. It's more just sharing what we do, so they've got a little understanding of what we do in a bit more detail, and giving them an opportunity to ask questions or do some workshops where it's a little bit interactive, and them almost coming up with the answers themselves. So we've done some stuff on touchline behaviours and what's appropriate and what's not, and why it's appropriate and what's not. But it's not us preaching to them with a PowerPoint at the front. It's that you guys tell us what you feel and what your experiences of at this club or other clubs or grassroots football would be, and what do you think's the optimal learning environment for your children. When you actually strip it back down to, it's not professional football. You're not playing in front of 20,000 people on a Saturday. It's a bunch of 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds who playing a game of football with their parents watching. So it's trying to make sure that maybe the behaviours that they hadn't considered, they actually have a little bit of thought process about, right, okay, yeah, this is why we do things, and have an understanding on it.
Yeah, as someone with a father who used to stand on the sideline shouting, "Go on, Stewie, get it in the onion bag," I can understand entirely how acutely embarrassing it can be to have your parents shouting and screaming on the sideline.
Yeah, and I mean, we're very conscious that we don't want it to be this sanitised, parents aren't allowed to talk, and I've seen it at a number of clubs, and I've seen some sort of initiatives where it's been these silent touchlines, and I don't necessarily agree with that, because ultimately the parents want to engage it, the parents want to enjoy it, and it can be positive messages, and it can be encouragement, and applauding good play or attempted good play by both the opposition and your own team, so that way it's promoting values of sportsmanship and things like that as well. And I wouldn't want to completely remove the parents altogether. We've been to some environments and some games where it's been parent-free zones, and I just think, why would you isolate the parents from the kids who want to come in and share that experience? But as long as it's shared in the right way, then we're all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you entirely. I had Russell Earnshaw on the show. He's not, the podcast hasn't come out yet, but he was telling me about how he used a constraint-led approach to spectator behaviour recently at a festival. So down in Bristol, right, funnily enough, with Gordano and the guys down there, where they actually gave points out to people on the sideline who gave positive messages to opposing players, and likewise with the players on the pitch, and they said it created a really interesting experience. So I think that's something I'm going to be experimenting with in the next few weeks.
I'll have to speak to him about that next time he comes in to see us. Yeah,
listen, I tell you what, I'm really appreciative of your time, Jonathan. It's been a really interesting conversation, and thank you very much for sharing some of your experiences and allowing me to kind of pick your brains a little bit. I think there's loads of amazing things that are happening within your academy, and I know, as like most of us in this world, we all know we could be doing it better in lots of different ways, but thanks very much for sharing your experiences.
No problem, happy to have a chat.
Great stuff. If people want to find out more about what you're doing and anything that you're putting out there, is there a best way for them to get in touch?
The best way to contact me personally would be probably through Twitter, so at Johnny Henderson. And then we share a lot of stuff that we do with the Academy, which is at Rovers Academy. The Twitter page will have a link to the website, which has got our online ball mastery videos and the curriculum and all that sort of stuff as well. So we're quite happy to share a lot of what we do. We put a lot of stuff out there, and lots of little videos and snippets and bits and pieces that are going on. So yeah, that'd probably be the best way to try and find some stuff about the Academy in more detail.
Brilliant stuff. Well, once again, very appreciative of you coming on. I know people will take an awful lot out of this one, so thank you again.